finding of whether or not the district has violated or is violating special education laws. The impartial hearing is really where I practice the most, because that is the most targeted venue for your child's needs, where you're not kind of limited to only changes within the IEP, but it can go beyond that to things like private compensatory education funding and private school potentially, and after school services. So I see my slide. Okay, I hope you guys can see the whole thing. But compensatory education, since I've been doing this virtually since the pandemic, this is huge. It's still huge. I still see when I'm reviewing records, IEPs, where the child is not there's documented evidence that the child didn't really access the remote learning for a whole variety of reasons: disability, age, behavior, lack of someone who can facilitate that. So it's important to note in New York City that the statute of limitations has been tolled, meaning it's kind of like the clock stopped between March 2020 and November 2020. This is very technical, but typically a parent only has 2 years to raise concerns about their child's education. So the information I'm putting forth here, which is not necessarily legal advice, is get your claims in before November 2022 because of that 2-year statute of limitations. If you're looking for makeup services to make up for past denials of FAPE, of the free appropriate education. With compensatory education, there's quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches. By quantitative, I've done cases where it is, the parents my child missed 50 sessions of speech, and I want all 50 sessions back. Qualitative approach is more thinking as a whole. When my child didn't really access remote learning by the special ed teacher over the course of 2 or 3 years, so I want to make up for that, and I think that having private sets by an ABA trained teacher is what my child needs to make up for that deficit. So again, all of this is a lot that can be addressed in its own PowerPoint, but I just wanted to touch on all of it. And now, beyond after school beyond compensatory education, which is really specifically to make up for past denials of FAPE, there are kids who just somewhat automatically need the after school services. So a child's school day doesn't necessarily need to end at 2:30 when they get on the bus to go home. I have a lot of clients who have additional support, as long as it works for the family, in terms of their childcare arrangements and dynamics, to have an outside provider, funded by the Department of Education, come in and work on all of these skills, toileting, communication, self-regulation. For my older kids, travel training and community skills. Under the law, the standard is that it has to be necessary. It has to be a necessary component of the child's special education program, so that without it, the child won't make progress. So it is a pretty high standard to meet. But when you think about the possibilities of, instead of coming home and dealing with your child yourself, along with all, if you have other children or other work obligations, you can have a trained individual, free of cost, coming in and helping with all of these skills to transfer them over. And I, most commonly see it, with ABA, the Applied Behavior Analysis for the children on the spectrum. And then private school tuition, this is the most complex of the, remedies or relief that parents have available in terms of the advocacy and litigation involved, but I did want to bring it up. So you essentially are kind of thinking is my child one of those children who just doesn't quite fit into the special class ratios that are offered. Is my child, not quite a 12 to 1 to 1, but 8 to 1 to 1 wouldn't fit for him, or are they somewhat in between some of these, in between, a 12 to 1 in a community school versus a larger class, inclusion class in a District 75 program. So these are all kind of the conversations that are had, at least between myself and parents, where they feel like they want to take this step and look outside of the public school system. Does your child require a particular teaching methodology? So like my clients with dyslexia, which is now called like a specific reading disorder, in a specific learning disability in reading, or in Gillingham or Wilson reading, or methodologies. Of course, there's ABA for autism, floor time, just different teaching methodologies that may not be fully present and utilized in your child's current school. But if you do have that evidence that your child really requires this, either through an outside evaluation or a medical report, that could be something that can add to a case for funding. And there are two different types of private schools. There are the ones that are approved by New York State. They're called sometimes NPS, non-public schools, which the DOE, through their central base support team, can identify if they do kind of go through this analysis and feel like there's no public school that can meet this child's needs. And then there are non-state approved independent schools that are out there that target different disabilities, and a lot of them are in Manhattan, a few in Brooklyn, more popping up in Queens, very few in the Bronx. Unfortunately, there's one. No, I don't think there's one, at least a non-state approved independent school in Staten Island. But there are schools out there, and families sometimes come across, they start Googling like, autism school or dyslexia school, and some of these schools will pop up, and, that kind of kickstarts the research that the parent has. So I know I went over my time. There was extensive discussion about transition planning. In terms of your right, the whole goal is to have your child be able to lead as productive a life as possible after high school. The vocational assessments should be happening at around age 12. The transition planning, that IEP in which that school year where the child's turning 15. Your child also has the right to start, to be invited to attend these meetings if you feel that is what is appropriate in those circumstances. And I've done cases for private transition services. If you feel like your child needs more than what's offered, there is potentially ABA type or private agencies that can take on that role after school of doing the travel training and vocational training. And then lastly, your child's eligible, as long as he or she hasn't graduated with a diploma, eligible for an IEP until they're 21. And that's it. And this is my contact information. I'm sorry for going over, but I'm, ready to take any questions.
This was very valuable information. Do we